So I know everyone is hungry, and I think people did have a false alarm in terms of lunch, so I will try to whiz through this quickly. What I will do is I will whip through the methodology very quickly so that I do have time for the results, probably the most important part, particularly for those who are working with families. So this is a systematic review that was conducted by myself and two other researchers. The purpose of the review was to see what is out there in terms of families and problem gambling. There was a little bit of research out there when we started the review, and we realized that the research that was out there was either outdated, was based on literature reviews and not on empirical studies. So we decided to conduct a systematic review to be able to regroup all the empirical studies. So this systematic review examined two questions. First, what is the impact of problem gambling on families? And second, what is the role of the family in problem gambling treatment? The inclusion and exclusion criteria, if you do have questions, they're in a publication which I will post at the end. So any empirical study that was conducted between 1998 and February 2013 was eligible to be included in this study. We located 30 empirical studies we included 30 empirical studies in this review. And just a little bit of information about the studies that were included. So in terms of the sample, in 17% of the studies that were included, only the gambling individual was part of the study. In 50% of the studies, the family members only were part of the study. And in 33% of the studies, it was mixed, gambling individual and family. So just a little idea of where these studies came from. We do see that they were across 5 continents, which I think is encouraging. 13 were from Canada, 20% from Australia, 13% from the USA, 10% from the UK, and 1 study from Singapore, 1 study from Norway, 1 from New Zealand, and 1 from Brazil. So in terms of what these studies examined, we can see that 97% or 29 of the 30 studies had some relationship with the impact of problem gambling on families. Only 8 studies out of the 30 actually examined the role of the family in problem gambling treatment. Results. So in terms of the studies that examined the impact of problem gambling on families, we divided this into studies that looked at the impact on spouses or partners, the studies that looked at the impact on children, the studies that looked at parents of adult problem gambling individuals, and studies that looked at overall family and couple functioning. So in terms of spouses or partners, there were 22 studies out of 30 that looked at the impact of problem gambling on spouses or partners. There were 3 key findings among the 22 studies. First one was that there is a lack of understanding or awareness of problem gambling among spouses or among partners. And this, of course, can have many implications for a partner because often once they do find out, once they do realize the problem is as large as it is, quite often there's quite a bit of debt that has incurred as well as many other consequences. The second one is that there are individual, family, and social consequences. So on an individual level for partners, significant psychological distress, physical health problems, financial loss, and devastation. In terms of family, it has a strain on parent-child relationships, so not only for the gambling individual, but also for the non-gambling parent. And there were other parenting issues as well that were reported in the studies. Social consequences for spouses or partners are isolation and lack of support. And the third finding was the importance of coping skills. So coping skills, which will come back again later when we look at the involvement of families in problem gambling treatment. Spouses or partners who had good coping skills tended to have lower levels of distress. And also this tended to also have a link with the actual gambling behavior and the individual with gambling difficulties, their gambling treatment outcomes. For children, there were a few studies, there weren't just 3, but there were a few studies that looked at children in a mixed sample with other family members as well, but there were only 3 studies out of the 30 that had child-only samples, so that looked at specifically the effect of problem gambling on children. 2 of the studies were for children under the age of 18. One of these studies coined a term called pervasive loss to refer to one of the effects of problem gambling on children under the age of 18, meaning that the loss is at many, many levels for these children. Other studies also reported adjustment and conduct problems and increased risk of maltreatment among children when a parent has a gambling problem. For children over the age of 18, there was only one study that looked at specifically the impact on children over the age of 18. It impacted mental health, relationships, and finances in this study. And time and financial aid for the parent was also one of the effects for these children. Parents of a child, an adult child, there's only been one study done that looked at specifically parents or parent-in-laws. And this one study reported a lot of responsibility and blame that parents report, decreased life satisfaction, physical and emotional stress, financial problems, as well as other effects as well. Overall impact on couple and family functioning. Overall, the studies, all of the studies that reported on couple and family functioning found that there was increased conflict, communication problems, isolation, less cohesion, intimacy difficulties in couples, higher rates of separation and divorce, higher rates of family violence, intimate partner violence, and childhood maltreatment. So the other part of this systematic review looked at the family involvement in problem gambling treatment and what has been studied in terms of family involvement in problem gambling treatment. There were only 8 studies, and these 8 studies had some similarities among them. So 5 of the 8 studies examined the effects of enhanced coping skills among family members. All 5 studies did not involve the problem gambling individual in the study. It was only with family members that were part of the sample. And all 5 studies had very similar methodology, not identical questions, but similar, and similar results. So they did find that by using the CRAFT manual, spouses, as well as other family members, not just spouses, who had better coping skills tended to have lower levels of distress, and they tended to have less gambling consequences when their coping skills were more effective. The second group of studies, there were 2 studies that examined the effects of couple therapy. They were by the same researcher, and both studies looked at specifically the effects of one particular model of couple therapy with gambling individuals and their partners. The researcher also reported that there were benefits in involving spouses in the treatment. Of course, there was adherence to a specific treatment model, and there was not a control group in these 2 studies, so there were some limitations in the 2 studies these 2 studies that were conducted. The last study was quite different in that it was a huge study done in the United States of secondary data. So what they did is they examined the secondary data at a treatment center in Oregon, and they looked at over 4,000 gambling individuals' outcomes in treatment, and what they found is that for those gambling individuals who had significant others, they had better treatment outcomes, even if the significant other was not involved in treatment. For those gambling individuals who had a significant other who was involved in treatment, they also had better treatment outcomes and had longer treatment retention. So just the presence of a significant other did have an impact on their involvement. Did have an impact on their gambling treatment outcomes, and having a significant other who was involved in treatment had other benefits that the other 2 groups that they examined did not have. So in summary, what we know that problem gambling has many adverse effects on individuals, couples, and families, as this is probably not a surprise for anyone here. We know that family involvement in treatment shows positive effects on individual and family functioning and also on problem gambling treatment outcomes. We know that the development of effective coping skills is very important for family members, family functioning, and gambling behavior. What we don't know, and there still is quite a bit that we don't know. I highlighted a few questions here that we don't know, but there is much more that we don't know, in fact. There is more that we don't know than what we actually do know. We don't know how many people are affected by a significant other's gambling. There is one statistic that keeps getting thrown out for those that have read the research on gambling and families. 8 to 10 others are affected. This is an old statistic. Families generally are not included in most of the epidemiology research that is out there. So we do need a little bit more about families and how many are affected. We also don't know the factors affecting the degree to which individuals and families are affected. So we do know a little bit about coping skills, but there are many other factors that we don't know about. We don't know if there are some family members, for example, spouses, siblings, parents, children, that are more greatly impacted. It was impossible with the number of studies that were in this review and with the divergence in all the studies to be able to actually do any type of comparison. But this is also, I think, a key point to understand is who is more greatly impacted and how. We also don't know what type of family involvement is most helpful. So how can we get family involved in a way that would be more beneficial for the family member, but also for the gambling individual? Limitations and gaps in this research. So there was a lot of divergence, as I mentioned, across the 30 studies. We do need a lot more replication. More research is needed to understand other variables that may be impacting a lot of these results. We need more longitudinal research. 73% of these studies were cross-sectional. We need inclusion of both family and problem gambling individuals in samples. In this study, in this review, only 33% of the studies had both family members and gambling individuals. And we also need more studies on other family members. So, for example, parents and children, there were very few studies that, there was only one on parents, and there were only 3 that focused specifically on children. So we do need more studies on other family members. And that is it. So for those who are interested in reading a little bit more about the study and getting a little bit more information, you can always consult that. If you don't have access, because I know that there are some people here who are not from an academic field, but if you do want access to the article, you can always email me. Thank you.